All right, so, we're diving into some really fascinating stuff today. You sent over that great YouTube video with Ed Mylett and John Maxwell talking about leadership and like really big life changes.
Yeah.
And then you also sent some like deeper articles exploring Maxwell's thinking on leadership. And
With work.
yeah, his work, exactly. And like what we want to do in this deep dive is trying to pull out like the real core wisdom, from all this stuff. Give you a shortcut, right, to these really important ideas around leadership, personal growth, and like how do we live with intention, so you can feel informed and like
And not get bogged down.
not get bogged down in all the books and the articles and the videos.
Yeah, really practical takeaways that you can implement.
Yes, exactly right. We want to give you the knowledge, but also make it like usable and actionable.
Actionable. That's a good word for it.
Yeah, right. So, and I think just starting off, John Maxwell, we should say, right, has had a massive impact like in this whole area, right? He's been a leading voice for decades now.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right. And he's written so many best-selling books, like over 30 million copies sold. So clearly he's resonating with people, right?
He has such a gift for taking these, these complex ideas and making them, accessible, easy to digest. And that's probably a big part of the reason why he's been so successful and impactful.
Yeah. Not only is he writing all these books, right? He's actively out there training leader and across all different areas, right? Like business, nonprofits, churches, you name it. So
Yeah.
we are dealing with like some foundational ideas here that have really spoken to millions of people.
Mm-hmm.
So let's dive in. Right out of the gate, like one of the first things Maxwell says in that interview that really like struck me, he says, most people don't lead their life, they accept their life. That's a powerful statement, Like what's the key difference between like accepting and leading?
Well, I think the big difference is like, accepting life is like being on autopilot.
Okay.
You're just kind of going with the flow. Whatever happens, happens.
Oh, right.
Leading your life is about being intentional, right?
Okay.
You're in the driver's seat. You're making choices. You're setting goals. You're taking action.
So it's like proactive versus reactive.
Exactly.
Okay. So he's basically saying like, if you're just accepting your life, you're kind of settling.
Yeah. You're settling for circumstances that maybe don't align with your true potential, with, what you really want to be doing with your life.
Even if like we're not doing it consciously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it is unconscious. It's just like the path of least resistance.
Okay. Yeah.
But if you really want to create a life that you love, a life that's meaningful, a life that, you feel passionate about, then you have to lead it. You have to make those conscious choices.
And this is like the foundation, right, of like any real transformation, you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're not leading your life, if you're just accepting it, then you're never going to be able to really change.
Okay. Yeah.
Because transformation requires you to make a decision, to step outside of your comfort zone, to, do things differently.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're just kind of, on autopilot, then that's never going to happen.
Now, something else that was really interesting in the Mylett interview was, hearing about Maxwell's own evolution, right? He was a successful pastor for years. Like, that was his career.
Yeah.
Right. But then he kind of transitioned into this whole leadership thing, like in the business world.
Yeah. And it wasn't like this overnight kind of thing,
Yeah.
It was like this gradual kind of evolution for him.
Okay. So talk about that. What was it like, that transition for him?
Well, he was really successful as a pastor and he was really enjoying it. But at some point, his publisher pointed out that like 2/3 of the people who were buying his books were actually from the business world.
Yeah.
And that really made him stop and think like, maybe my message is resonating with a broader audience than I thought.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And so he started to kind of explore that, started speaking more to business audiences. And the more he did that, the more he realized that, the principles of leadership that he was talking about were just as relevant in the business world as they were in the church world.
Right.
And so it was kind of like this natural progression, for him to shift his focus.
So it wasn't like he was just like, all right, I'm done with being a pastor. Now I'm going to go be a leadership guru.
No. It was much more organic than that.
Okay.
And I think that's an important lesson for all of us, that sometimes our path isn't always clear from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
We might start out on one path and then, as we go along, we realize that maybe there's a different path that's a better fit for us.
Okay.
And that's okay, to change course.
And you know what's interesting too is like he felt this calling, right, to kind of move into this world.
But he describes it as like having this divine touch,
Yeah,
right? Like
yeah.
it was more than just like, oh, I think I'm good at this.
Right.
It was like there was this like purpose behind it.
Right. And I think, you know, for some people, that calling might be very clear, very specific. You know, they might have like a dream or a vision.
Yeah.
But for others, it might be more subtle.
Yeah.
You know, it might be more of a feeling, a sense that there's something more that they're meant to be doing. And I think it's important to pay attention to those feelings, those intuitions,
Yeah.
because they might be guiding you towards your true calling.
And, you know, I think that really resonates with a lot of people listening right now, right?
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people feel this tug
Yeah.
towards something more. You know, even if their current professional life is good,
Yeah.
like even if they're successful,
Yeah.
they still feel like there's something else out there.
There's something missing. Yeah, there's something missing. And Maxwell's experience, I think, really validates that feeling, you know?
Absolutely.
And it's like, it's okay to pursue that.
Yeah.
Even if it's scary.
Yeah.
Even if it means, you know, changing course.
Right. And I think that's one of the things that Maxwell talks about a lot is this idea of, you know, not being afraid to let go of the past, you know, even if it was successful, even if it was good.
Right.
Because sometimes holding on to the past can actually prevent you from moving forward into something even better.
Okay.
And he uses this really powerful phrase. He talks about doing an autopsy on success.
Oh, wow. That is powerful.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
You know, so you don't want to be like clinging to past successes and resisting those necessary changes.
So it's like what got you here might not get you there.
Exactly.
Right.
You know, and I think that's something that we all need to be aware of, especially in today's world where things are changing so rapidly.
Yeah.
What worked yesterday might not work tomorrow. And so we need to be constantly evolving, constantly adapting, constantly learning. And that means being willing to let go of the past,
Oh, okay.
even if it was good,
Okay.
even if it was successful.
Wow, that's really powerful, you
Yeah.
know. And you know, this kind of ties into his book Put Your Dream to the Test.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And that first question he asks is your dream really your dream?
That's a really good question.
Right. Like we should all be asking ourselves that, you
Yeah.
know. And
Yeah.
so often we're living out like other people's dreams.
Yeah. I know. Could be a parent's dreams. It could be society's dreams. It could be, you know, what we think we're supposed to do.
Like what's expected of us.
Yeah.
Right. And we never really stop to think like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Is this actually what I want?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, Maxwell shares a story in his book about how, you know, he grew up in a musical family
Okay.
and his parents really wanted him to be a musician.
Yep.
And so, you know, he started playing music at a young age and he was good at it, you know, but he never really loved it. It wasn't his passion. And it wasn't until he was in college that he realized that, you know, his true passion was for leadership.
Okay.
And so he made a decision to switch gears, even though it meant disappointing his parents.
Wow.
And, you know, it was a tough decision, but it was the right decision for him.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important lesson for all of us, you know, that sometimes we have to be willing to make tough decisions,
Yeah.
to say no to things that we're good at or that other people want us to do if they're not truly aligned with our own passions and our own dreams.
Right. So the key is really to figure out what your own dream is.
Yeah.
And then have the courage to pursue it.
Yeah.
Right.
Because if you're living someone else's dream, you might achieve success, you know, by external measures, but you're never going to be truly fulfilled.
Oh.
You know, it's like, you know, think about David trying on King Saul's armor. You know,
Yeah.
like it was impressive armor,
Yeah.
but it wasn't the right fit for David.
Right.
And so it weighed him down.
Yeah.
You know, it prevented him from being able to move freely and to fight effectively.
Okay.
And it's the same thing with our dreams. You know, if we're trying to live someone else's dream,
Yeah.
it's going to weigh us down.
Yeah.
It's going to prevent us from being able to truly be ourselves and to achieve our full potential.
And it's not going to give us that deep sense of satisfaction.
Right.
Even if it looks good from the outside.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, it's like trying to wear someone else's clothes. You know?
Yeah.
You might look good on the hanger, but they're not going to fit you, right?
Yeah.
And they're not going to make you feel comfortable.
And now let's talk about leadership, right? Because Maxwell's probably best known for his work on leadership, right?
Yeah.
And he's got this really famous definition. He says, leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less.
Yeah, and that's so simple, but it's so powerful.
Right.
Yeah.
So break that down for us a little bit. Like, what's he getting at there?
Well, I think what he's getting at is that leadership is not about a title or a position.
Okay.
It's not about being in charge.
Right.
It's about the ability to influence others.
Okay.
And that influence can be positive or negative.
Yeah.
You know.
Oh, okay.
But ideally, we want to be using our influence for good.
Right.
We want to be influencing others in a way that helps them to grow, to develop, to become the best versions of themselves.
And so are you saying then that anyone can be a leader?
Yeah, I think so. I think anyone who has the ability to influence others is a leader, whether they realize it or not.
Okay.
You know, it could be a parent, it could be a teacher, it could be a friend, it could be a colleague, it could be a neighbor, it could be, anyone who's making a difference in the lives of other people.
And the key is influence then.
Yeah, influence.
Okay.
And I think one of the things that Maxwell talks about a lot is that, the best way to increase your influence is to add value to other people.
Okay.
The more you can help other people,
Yeah.
the more you can serve them,
Yeah.
the more you can make a difference in their lives, the more they're going to trust you,
Okay.
and the more they're going to be open to your influence.
Okay.
And that's really what leadership is all about. It's about building relationships. It's about earning trust. It's about serving others.
Okay.
And when you do that, you naturally increase your influence.
And then he talks about like finding the right position,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
He even tells that quick story, right, about his basketball coach and how the coach would like put talented players in the wrong position, just to prove a point.
Yeah. He was a good coach, but he was kind of a bit of a character.
Yeah.
And he would do things like that just to, teach his players a lesson.
Okay.
And I think the lesson there is that even if you're talented, even if you're skilled, if you're not in the right position, you're not going to be able to reach your full potential.
Right. So the talent's not enough.
Right. Exactly.
You got to be in the right spot.
You got to be in the right spot. You got to be doing the right things.
Okay.
You got to be using your talents in a way that allows you to really shine.
And he talks about finding your sweet spot.
Right.
Like where is that?
Well, your sweet spot is that place where your natural talents
Okay.
and your passions and the needs of the world intersect.
Oh, okay.
So it's like finding that perfect Venn diagram overlap, where you're doing something that you're good at, that you love to do, and that also makes a difference in the world.
Okay.
And when you find that sweet spot, that's when you're really able to thrive. That's when you're really able to achieve great things.
No, what's interesting too is like he talks about this concept of like, the top 5%. Right. In any given field, know. And he's saying like the way you get there is not by focusing on your weaknesses, it's by focusing on your strengths.
Yeah, absolutely.
So explain that a little bit.
Well, a lot of people, they spend a lot of time and energy trying to fix their weaknesses.
Yeah.
And, there's nothing wrong with trying to improve yourself.
Right.
But if you're constantly focusing on your weaknesses, it can actually hold you back from achieving your full potential.
Oh, okay.
Because what you're really good at, what you're really passionate about, those are your strengths. And those are the things that you should be focusing on.
Okay.
Those are the things that are going to make you stand out, that are going to make you unique, that are going to make you successful.
So basically you're saying like, we should all be aware of our weaknesses.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But don't obsess over them. Focus on your strengths.
Focus on your strengths.
Okay.
And then, find ways to delegate or to outsource the things that you're not good at.
So that you can really spend your time and energy doing the things that you're great at.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, Maxwell himself, he had to realize this too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
He realized that, he was better at equipping people than counseling them.
Yeah. And that was a big realization for him.
Okay.
Because, he had been trained as a counselor.
Yeah.
And he thought that was, his calling, that was what he was supposed to be doing.
Right.
But then he realized that he actually wasn't very good at it.
Oh, interesting.
And that he was much better at teaching, at training, at equipping people.
Okay.
And so he made a decision to shift his focus. And that's when he really started to thrive.
Okay.
That's when he really started to make a difference in the world.
And he identifies 4 key areas, right? Like for success, whether it's personal or professional.
Yeah.
He talks about relationships, equipping, attitude, and leadership.
Yeah. And those are so foundational you know?
Right. Like, it doesn't matter what you're doing.
Yeah.
Those are crucial.
Yeah. Because, relationships are everything, right? We're social creatures. We need to be connected to other people.
Right here.
And strong relationships give us support. They give us encouragement. They give us accountability. They help us to stay on track.
And then equipping. Right. Like, what does he mean by that?
Well, equipping is about helping other people to develop their skills and their talents.
Okay.
It's about giving them the tools and the resources that they need to succeed.
Okay.
And it's not just about, giving them information. It's about mentoring them, coaching them, supporting them.
Okay.
Really investing in their growth. And then attitude, it's so important. Your attitude determines everything.
Okay.
If you have a positive attitude, you're going to be more resilient. You're going to be more persistent. You're going to be more likely to overcome challenges. And you're going to be more fun to be around.
Right. Which is also important.
Yeah. Yeah, nobody wants to be around a negative Nancy.
Yeah.
And then leadership, we've already talked about that.
Yeah.
But it's so important to be able to lead yourself,
Yeah.
to be able to set goals, to be able to make decisions, to be able to take action.
Right.
And then also to be able to lead others, to be able to inspire them, to motivate them, to help them to achieve their goals.
Okay.
And so those 4 things, relationships, equipping, attitude, and leadership, those are really the foundation for success in any area of life.
Now let's talk about taking action.
Yeah.
Right. Because, Maxwell talks about this law of the catalyst. And basically he's saying that, good leaders, they make things happen.
They're not passive.
Right.
They don't wait for things to happen to them.
Right.
They go out and they make things happen.
Okay.
And I think one of the things that holds a lot of people back from taking action is fear.
Okay.
They're afraid of failure. They're afraid of what other people might think. They're afraid of the unknown.
Right.
But the truth is, fear is a liar.
Okay.
It's always telling us that we can't do something, that we're not good enough, that we're going to fail. But that's just not true.
And Maxwell says that, like your own success is the credibility of a leader.
Right.
So you need to achieve results yourself before you can expect other people to follow you.
Exactly. People are much more likely to follow someone who has a proven track record of success
Yeah.
than someone who's just talking a good game.
Okay.
So if you want to be a leader, you need to go out and make things happen. You need to get results.
And he uses that great analogy, right, of driving a car at night.
Yeah.
You can only see as far as your headlights.
Yeah.
You still got to start driving.
You still got to start driving.
Right.
Yeah.
To see what's ahead.
Exactly.
And it's the same thing with life, right?
Yeah.
We don't always know what the future holds.
Yeah.
But we have to be willing to take that first step.
Yeah.
To move forward into the unknown.
Yeah.
And trust that the path will become clear as we go.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the most important things that we can learn from John Maxwell.
Okay.
Is that we don't have to have all the answers.
Oh, okay.
We don't have to have everything figured out.
Yeah.
We just have to be willing to take action to move forward.
Yeah.
To trust the process.
And he talks about leadership.
Right.
Like that's a whole book he wrote on this.
Yeah.
Right. And basically he's saying that, leadership isn't about control.
Right.
It's not about sticking to a rigid plan. It's about being adaptable
right. Yeah.
and flexible.
Yeah.
Right.
It's about being willing to change course when necessary.
And so what's the danger of not being adaptable?
Well, I think the danger is that you become irrelevant.
Oh, okay.
The world is changing so rapidly.
Yeah.
And if you're not willing to change with it,
Right.
you're going to get left behind.
And he talks about how the pace of change is accelerating,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's faster and faster.
Faster and faster, yeah. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that leaders face today is just keeping up with the pace of change.
And he even says, fast is faster, forward is shorter.
Yeah, yeah. Right. Like what used to take years to change now takes months or even weeks.
Right.
And so leaders need to be able to make decisions quickly. They need to be able to adapt to new situations quickly. They need to be able to pivot quickly.
And he actually says that, he's made 11 major leadership shifts.
Yeah.
5 times in his career.
Yeah. And that's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot of change.
Right.
But it's necessary,
Yeah.
because if you're not willing to change, you're not going to be able to grow.
Right. You're going to become stagnant.
Yeah, exactly.
And now, we all know this, people resist change.
Yeah.
right? It's like a natural human thing.
Yeah. Change is hard.
Right.
It's uncomfortable. It's scary.
So what's the leader's role in helping people through that resistance?
Well, I think the leader's role is to cast a vision,
Okay.
to paint a picture of what the future could look like if we embrace change.
Oh, okay.
You know, to show people that change can be good, that
Right.
it can lead to something better,
Okay.
and then to provide support and encouragement along the way.
So you're saying like the leader's got to help people see the benefits of the change.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, if people don't see the benefits, they're not going to be motivated to change.
Okay.
So the leader has to be able to articulate those benefits clearly and to inspire people to believe that change is possible.
Okay. And he also talks about this really interesting idea of like shifting from pleasing people
Yeah.
to challenging people.
Yeah. And that was a big shift for Maxwell himself.
Okay.
You know, early in his career, he was all about trying to please everyone.
Okay.
You know, he wanted to be liked, he wanted to be popular, he wanted everyone to be happy.
Right.
But then he realized that, that wasn't really leadership.
Okay.
That was just people pleasing.
Okay.
And that true leadership was about helping people to grow.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that meant challenging them.
Okay.
Sometimes that meant giving them tough feedback.
Okay.
Sometimes that meant pushing them outside of their comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
And that wasn't always easy.
Right.
It wasn't always popular,
Yeah.
but it was necessary.
Right. Because you're not helping them by just like making them feel good all the time.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Sometimes you have to be willing to have those difficult conversations
Yeah.
to tell people the truth, even if it's not what they want to hear,
Okay.
because that's what true leadership is all about.
Okay. Now, there's this really important distinction that Maxwell makes between trained leaders and transformational leaders.
Yeah, that's a really important distinction.
Right. And I think it's really relevant to what we're talking about here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what's the difference?
Well, trained leaders, they have the knowledge and the skills to lead.
Okay.
They've been trained, they've taken courses, they've read books, they've been mentored.
Right.
But transformational leaders, they're different.
Oh, okay.
Transformational leaders, they have the ability to inspire and to motivate others to achieve great things.
Okay.
They have the ability to create a vision and to get people excited about that vision.
Okay.
They have the ability to build trust and to get people to follow them, not because they have to, but because they want to.
So it's not just about having the skills, it's about like the impact you're having
Right.
on other people.
Yeah, it's about the impact you're having on other people. It's about the legacy you're leaving behind.
Okay.
You know?